The only measure of democracy is where the body meets the state. The state can tell you what to do, how, where, and when to do it. And if you don't obey, you can be punished. To one extent or other, we agree to this. We accept this as legitimate, as the cost of living in society. Legitimacy and democracy find their limit when we vivisection a citizen and cleave from them their rights and their agency, and start fantasizing about a person being embodied in a heartbeat. The anti-abortion laws turn doctors into spies, eliminating any presumption of medical privacy or patient-client privilege. These laws also turn women into servants of the state. Tonight, I have the honor and privilege of talking to philosopher, bioethicist, and essayist Jon Weindenbaum here in New York City, and Susi Ferrarello, philosopher, bioethicist, educator, and author of the new book, The Phenomenology of Pregnacy and Early Motherhood. I've noticed a shift that people are much more pro-life now, that the pro-choice position has not been argued to any extent anymore. I mean, but what are you guys seeing from other Americans, from your students?
Some of my classes, most of them, the general tone is pro-choice, fiery so. But in the Catholic school where I teach, then you get a real mix. Then it's divided.
And what do you see? Like, what are you seeing now from people?
No, even worse maybe than John, because I teach at Cal State, so it's a public university in the Bay Area. More and more students pro-life. Yeah. And I'm a kind of teacher that doesn't want to say what they should think, of course, right. Because I first
Devil's
believe in
advocate.
Philosophy and in the freedom of thinking. So yeah. I just let them free to say what they want to say. And the point remains the same. I mean, this is life, and it's a crime against life. Now I teach mostly online, so I don't see people getting hurt because that's what happens often, because there might be students who had abortions, who had to have abortions, and then they have to be involved in these debates where really I don't see much awareness for the role of the woman and what she's going through when she has to make a choice like this.
Susi, John and I are aware that you just recently published a book on the phenomenology of pregnancy and early motherhood. So not only are you someone that knows what it's like firsthand to be, not only are you someone that actually has the capacity for it, unlike John and I.
I really have no words for what level of violence is for a woman to arrive at the end of a pregnancy when they are against this pregnancy, and how much misery that brings not just to her but to the society. This baby, even if it gets adopted, has bodily schemas that are connected to a mother who wasn't willing to have them. There's a research from Limer that says that around the week 22nd, the woman starts creating a kind of a bodily schema. It's a way in which they respond to each other with the baby. So I don't know, the mother eats sugary food and it feels some kicks or some stretching.
That's fascinating. So it's almost like a function, right? We have
absolutely,
inputs and outputs,
yeah.
And you can map the function.
My thesis is that it's an intersubjective body that it creates with a pregnancy already and a birth. If it's a pregnancy that you want, it's fantastic. Now I'm talking to you, and there's a part of my body that is away at daycare, and I feel that there's this presence with me. But can you imagine when this presence is growing inside you and it's creating a schema with you. It's a constant reminder of violence.
I don't know if this comes at all close to what you're talking about, Susie. And it also reminds me a little of the classic Judith Jarvis Thompson's defense of abortion. Thompson's strategy, basically. I mean, of course, we know at the beginning of her article, she actually believes that a fetus is not a human being, but she accepts it for the sake of argument. She wants to argue, even if we declare a fetus human, abortion is still not an obligation. It's still something, it'd be awfully nice to lend out your body for 9 months, but you're not morally obligated to. And her strategy is to use these colorful thought experiments. One very classic one, you wake up in a bed in a hospital with your kidneys connected to an unconscious violinist, and the doctor says, well, the Society of Music Lovers canvassed the medical records and saw that you have the right blood type to save his life. He's got a kidney ailment. So you're obligated to stay in bed for 9 months to keep him alive. And of course, Thompson wants us to come to the conclusion, hell no. We have every moral right to break the cord and walk away. But Thompson's sort of main strategy with her colorful thought experiments is to get us to see, again, unborn child, because we're taking for granted that it's a human, is a stranger to us.
Yes.
And again, this is all the fallout from the idea that viability is the point in time. Roe v. Wade's position was that once the fetus is viable, we associate it with it being human.
Yeah, I can't date each exact argument.
No. I'm just to make it clear to someone who's not in the United States, someone who's watching it. In theory, across the United States, third trimester abortions were regulated under Roe. First trimester abortions were completely legal, and second trimester abortions, to some extent or other, could be regulated. And the current situation is that Dobbs has thrown that completely out, and it's in the States. Now, in the argument, in fact, in Dobbs itself, in the argument for Dobbs, a lot of talk happened about what the rights of women for abortion in Europe are.
In general, we have countries where abortion laws are liberal. In the Netherlands, it's allowed up to 24 weeks, in Sweden up to 22 weeks, France, Germany, Italy, Spain still have quite liberal regulations of abortion up to 12 weeks. The point is, what do we do with the attitude of personal individuals who don't feel at ease with performing an abortion? Because, for example, in Italy, in Romania, in Greece, it is allowed to perform an abortion up to 12 weeks, more or less. But nevertheless, there's a growing number of people working in perinatal care who refuse to perform abortion. So we have the rights, but we don't have the access. And this creates even more confusion because there's an implied scarlet letter on the person who decides to go to that route, who knows that it's in her right, and suddenly she finds herself deprived from this decision, even when the fetus, for example, has birth defects. It becomes extremely hard after the translucent, for example, the ultrasound translucent, even if you know that the fetus has some defects, it becomes hard to have an abortion because implicitly the system does not allow it. And so many women have to carry the fetus until the second semester and perform a stillbirth, which is incredibly traumatic.
That's horrible.
Yes. So we are walking a fine line here. There are laws, sometimes they look liberal, but not necessarily they reflect the status of mind of the people who work in the field, or just people supporting the network of the woman who has to make the choice.
And there's also a lot of, I know specifically in Italy's case, that where abortions can be very difficult to have done on the public health system, but are readily available in the private system. thus marking a real class difference also in Italy about the subject.
The problem about private and public is quite poignant, mostly because of the time. I mean, performing an abortion, as we saw, it needs a very specific timeline. And if you miss a few days, it's a stillbirth. There's a passive way of delaying activities that is allowed by how crowded the public system is. Now, I'm here to defend the public health system because it's a little jewel that Italy still has. Nevertheless, when certain professionals do not want things to work, clearly a public health system favors this direction. If a woman has the means to continue through practice, to private practice, maybe it might be easier, but it's not much about private and public system, rather than information and lack of information. That's the painful point, because it's really hard to get the right information and to know to what extent you have the right to act on. This is very painful. They leave you often, and again, this is about Italy. They leave you alone in a room for hours, even if you have to perform an abortion, a medical abortion, and they don't let you be with anyone from your loving network. As a form of quiet punishment, they say it's for privacy. But in fact, it feels a little bit as a passive way to punish the woman who is deciding to take that route. You need to have an ultrasound, or this ultrasound needs to prove to show what situation and what status is the fetus, and then they decide the route of action. And then the ultrasound is another way of indirect punishment, because we will show you again that there's this life inside, and the ultrasound is manipulated in a way that it shows these embryo as something that is in fact living, and that is independent, that is a baby.
You interviewed someone on how
Yes.
these technologies like ultrasound can be manipulated, and they're not fully an accurate story about what's going on in a woman's uterus during this period. Can you expand on this a bit for us?
Yeah, the scholar you're referring to is Nicole Miglio, and she dedicated years of research on the accuracy of ultrasounds, and she is a strong advocate against the accuracy of ultrasounds. She says that most of the images we see, it's basically it's extremely hard to to be balanced in choosing words here. But it's an attempt to make this cluster of cells as closer as a human being possible. And this is not an innocent attempt.
It's funny how we take for granted how science and technology enhances objectivity. And I was struck by the video where Susi interviews, what's the name of the philosopher again?
Nicole Miglio.
Yeah, about how the sonogram actually, in a sense, constructs what we perceive, right? And it's loaded with all kinds of ideological shaping, so to speak.
As it concerns technology, it's not the first time. That's what I wanted to say. When in the 17th century, Leeuwenhoek, and for sure I'm butchering the name here,
with a microscope, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
Discovered the microscope, we started developing the theory of the homunculus, which was one of the main theory in support of negation of abortion, because, oh my God, can't you see these little human beings that are waiting in the ovaries to come out?
And again, the idea is that the homunculus is that this completely independent. So she's just like the ground, or like a parasitic vessel.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, we are exactly at the same point. Clearly, we know today that the zygote, that the inseminated sperm is not a full developed human being sitting inside the woman waiting for something to happen. We don't know yet what we see through the ultrasound, because again, there's enthusiasm around a new technological tool that we discovered, and hopefully it can bring objectivity to the problem. As it concerns the genesis of certain behavior from professionals, what I heard, the stories I collected, so it's nothing official, this is something I was exposed to, is that there's a certain level of tidiness toward performing these tasks over and over and over. So it's a burnout often that struck even people who are not necessarily religious or they were not necessarily against abortion. So it's an emotional burnout. And I think this has to do with the way in which we manage the health system. And this is true both in Italy and in the US and in many other countries where healthcare is becoming an instrument to make money, which is unacceptable. So doctors are doctors, nurses especially now, under a big pressure to do as much as possible. And when we expose people to something so emotionally draining as abortive practices, that count. So I think this is one of the reasons. Of course, those who decide immediately after their degrees to become to object abortion and become professionals who will never perform abortion, that is connected to their personal background, which might be religious or the kind of education they received. I mean, there are universities that are clearly Catholic in Italy, as well as in the US, I think. And these universities, of course, will provide textbooks that are in defense of certain views of life. Are they truly Catholic? I don't think so either. That's another point I would like to bring in this conversation.
And that's a really interesting point too, because I think let's actually pivot to that. Because
what do you mean that not truly Catholic?
Well, I mean, because this is that. Because I think so let's talk about what was the position originally with the Catholics, with Augustine and Aquinas.
Right.
I mean, if I can be a little boring and start from a little earlier, I can say that before the fathers of the church, there wasn't any particular thought given to the practice of abortion. Starting from ancient Greece, Soranus of Ephesus, he says, well, I can help you to perform abortion even better. Then Tertullian, we are talking second and third century after Christ. I mean, it's an important father of the church. He presented he described surgical implements that could make abortion more effective. And it's very interesting because we are talking about a father of the church who is writing more or less parallel to the Didache, first century, and there you find some hint against abortion. But let's keep to the big figures, to the protagonists of the early Catholic Church, or at least Christian thinking. St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas. When we think of the term pro-life, we think, okay, here we are expressing something that is deeply Augustinian, that is deeply embedded in the Catholic sentiment. And it's wrong. It's the best kept secret. Augustine, to start with him, didn't pay much attention to the problem of abortion. We have to think that it's always wrong to apply contemporary concepts to
Anachronistic.
sides of life that belong to the past. So we have to start from there. What was worried him was libidinosa crudelitas, meaning having sex against having sex for fun. So what changed?
Which is a real problem for Augustine. A real problem for Augustine.
Yes.
Yeah. What's it? God save me from. What's his famous statement? God bring me to grace, just not now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
we know from his biography that he was a passionate man, and he had to find his way to the right path, let's say, creating not so little problems for the people in his family. But anyway, so what happened here? In reference to the problem of sex, his point was we cannot allow sex for just pleasure. But then, when we think about the ontological status of the fetus, which is the big problem, the core of the debate as it is today, because today, more or less, the Catholic Church abandoned the idea you have to have sex only to have a child, because otherwise all the people in menopause or even married couples shouldn't have sex. So what changed for the ontological status was to believe that the fetus is not ensouled at the first weeks of pregnancy. So according to, I don't know, here I'm citing tests, the Nuptis et Concupiscentia, chapter 1, book 1, chapter 17, Enchiridion, Questionorum Ineptaque Torum. In all these books, Augustine says clearly, I ignore when the fetus becomes a human being. Ignoro quando incipia homo in utero vivere. So it's clear, it's said, it's written. By the way, he often uses metaphors close to vegetables. To nature, to indicate that this thing in the womb of the mother is just a little bud that didn't sprout yet. So abortion is a way to cut the bud and be free from it.
And that's in line with Plato's idea of the soul, right? Animal, like the vegetable animal and spiritual soul. There's no concept really in ancient Greek thought of a distinct moment of ensoulment.
No, in ancient Greek it was almost ridiculous. So I found this little passage from Lysias who said that abortion is a crime, but only if the woman is pregnant with a baby and her husband died, and this baby is going to be a male and is going to become the inheritor, the owner of the estate of the husband.
Susi, what did Aristotle say about ensoulment? I know that he has a very influential.
Allora,
that's going to come again with Aquinas too, because that feeds into Aquinas.
Exactly. Both Aristotle and Aquinas believe that the Hule and Morphe, right? So the matter and the form of this matter is animated when the intellect comes. So we come back to the debate about the cortex, the cerebral cortex we have nowadays. And according to both St. Thomas and St. Augustine, at the early stages of pregnancy, these cells are anima vegetabilis. Again, we come back
Vegetable
to
soul.
a comparison of this life to a vegetable, to something that is not ensouled yet. There's a late, delayed ensoulment. There's then the anima sensitiva. They start feeling something, they start reacting, and only at the last part there's the anima intellectiva. And this you can find in Summa Theologiae, book 2. And by the way, he didn't even care. Again, when is the fetus, independent of the mother's body?
Who were the
And
figures? I'm sorry, Susie, continue, please.
go ahead, sure.
I'm curious. So, what major figures, much later in the history of the Catholic Church, then shifted it to conception, as opposed to ensoulment?
I mean, Aquinas is against abortion, right? Because it hides sexual behavior, right?
Aquinas, no. Augustine is against having fun with sex. Just that. I mean, it's not against abortion. He says clearly, I ignore when this life becomes a life. I don't know if the woman who loses a baby is losing actual life. So he's just against libidinosa crudelitas. So he's just against sex.
And so then Aquinas, he barely even cares at all then.
He doesn't care much. We find some traces in Summa Theologiae, and these traces are more interested in what Aristotle is saying, meaning when does the matter becomes alive, and in that he clearly follows the Aristotelian hierarchy, for which there's a vegetable soul or intellect, whatever you want to call it, a sensitive, the animal, and then the intellective soul. So from Tertullian to St. Thomas to St. Anselm, San Vittore, you find an idea of delayed ensoulment. Then, of course, there were fathers of the church that thought that there is a direct ensoulment. But here we're citing big names against the theory of direct ensoulment. First, strong signs against abortion, to my knowledge, comes with Pius IX, the ninth. So we are in 1922. It's very interesting because it comes at the same time where eugenics is a thing.